She said it at my son's graduation party, right in front of the caterers in half our old neighborhood. She tilted her glass toward me. White wine, she always preferred white wine, and smiled the way she did when she knew she had an audience. "You know what your problem is?" she said. "You never could have done any of this without me." I didn't answer. I just looked at my son across the yard, watching him laugh with his friends, and I thought, she's right that I couldn't have done it without her. But she's wrong about what that means. Let me back up. We were married for 22 years. I was an electrician when we met, union work, steady money, not glamorous. She was in real estate, and she was good at it. Sharp mind, sharp tongue, and she knew how to read a room. I admired that about her. For a long time, I thought we balanced each other. What I didn't see, what took me far too long to see, was that she wasn't balancing me. She was managing me, keeping the ceiling low enough that she'd always be the one who could touch it. When our son was about 9, I started talking about going out on my own. I had the license, the experience, the contacts. A few guys I'd worked alongside for years were interested in partnering up. It wasn't a dream, it was a plan, a real one. She nodded, and then, quietly, over the following weeks, she talked to my contractor contact and told him I'd had some reliability issues on recent jobs. She mentioned to the banker I'd been speaking with that I had some unresolved debts. I didn't, but she said it casually enough that it planted a seed. She told my potential partners that I'd been going through some things at home. I didn't find out any of this until years later. At the time, I just watched the doors close one by one and told myself the timing wasn't right. She told me the same thing, the timing isn't right. Be patient. You need more experience. Let me handle the finances for now. It's just easier. I let her. That was my failure, not the business, not the contacts, not the timing. I handed her the keys and told myself it was trust. When our son was 12, she sat me down at the kitchen table and told me she wanted a divorce. She was calm about it, organized. She had already spoken to a lawyer. She had paperwork ready for me to sign. I signed. I was 61 years old and I signed papers that gave her the house, the savings account she'd moved funds into 18 months prior, and primary financial control of our son's college account. My lawyer, a man I'd found through the phone book, which tells you everything about how prepared I was, told me afterward that I had grounds to contest several of those arrangements. I looked at my son, who was standing in the hallway trying to hear what was happening, and I told my lawyer to let it go. My son didn't understand that. For a long time, he thought I'd just walked away. She made sure of it. She told people I'd been dead weight, that she'd carried the marriage, the finances, the household, that I'd been a decent enough man but had never really amounted to much, and that she'd finally decided to stop waiting for me to get there. Some people believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was polished. She had a career they could point to. I was a retired electrician living in a rented house 2 towns over, and I drove a 10-year-old truck. My son heard those stories, not from her directly. She was smarter than that. But through the way she'd sigh when he asked about me, the way she'd say, "Your father has always been," and then trail off. He was a teenager. He filled in the blanks the way teenagers do. We still talked. He still came to stay with me some weekends. But there was a distance there that hadn't existed before, a kind of careful politeness that hurt more than anger would have. He was measuring me against the version of me she'd described, and I didn't know how to argue against something I couldn't see. I didn't try. That was the choice I made, and I want to be clear. I made it on purpose. I'd watched men drag their kids into the middle of their divorces, and I'd seen what it did to those kids. My son didn't need to carry that. He didn't need me defending myself against his mother. He needed a father who showed up, fixed the leaky faucet in his apartment when he got older, remembered which college courses he was struggling with, and didn't make feel like a courtroom, so I showed up. I fixed things. I remembered, and I didn't say a word about any of the rest of it. Here's the thing about starting over at 61. Nobody hands you a roadmap. Nobody sits you down and explains the sequence of events. You just wake up one morning in a house that isn't yours, with a truck that needs new tires, and you figure out what you still know how to do. I knew how to work. I took a job with a commercial contractor, large industrial projects, hospitals, schools, manufacturing facilities. Longer hours than I'd been keeping, harder on the knees, but the pay was better than I'd earned in 20 years. I lived simply. I didn't eat out. I didn't travel. I drove that truck until it genuinely couldn't be driven anymore, and then I bought a used one and drove that. I also started talking to people again. Old contacts, former colleagues. A man I'd worked with 20 years earlier had started his own electrical contracting firm and had built it into something real. We'd stayed loosely in touch, the way you do. I called him and told him I was interested in being useful. He didn't need a partner, but he was expanding, and he needed someone who could manage project oversight. Someone with enough experience to walk into a commercial build and immediately understand what was behind the walls. We worked out an arrangement. That was 4 years after the divorce. 2 years after that, I bought into the company as a minority owner. 2 years after that, we landed a hospital renovation contract that changed everything. I wasn't the face of anything. I wasn't flashy. I didn't have a personal brand or a LinkedIn profile or any of the things that apparently signal success now. I had a reputation among contractors and project managers for being meticulous and reliable and not panicking when things went sideways, and that reputation quietly built something real. My son started noticing around year 5. I don't think he'd been looking closely before that, but I'd moved out of the rented house into something I owned, and he came to help me move some furniture in, and he walked through the place and got quiet in that way he had. He asked me, that afternoon while we were assembling a bookshelf, how long things had been going this way. I said a while. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "You didn't ask." He looked at me for a moment. She said, "He started and then stopped." I waited. She made it sound like things were bad for you, like you'd struggled. "I did struggle," I said. "That part was accurate, but he gestured around the room. The new house, the good neighborhood, the bookshelf we were building from oak, not pressed wood. I kept going," I said. "That's the whole story." He nodded slowly, and I could see something shift in him. Not all at once, not the way it happens in movies. Just a small adjustment, a recalibration. I didn't press it. I handed him the Allen wrench and told him to get the second shelf. His graduation party was last spring. He'd finished his master's degree, engineering, which still makes me slightly amazed, and his mother had offered to host it at her house. He asked me what I thought. I told him it was his party and his call. He chose her house. I understood why. It was larger, better suited for a crowd, and she threw a good party. I'll give her that. She always knew how to put on an event. I drove over that afternoon. I knew most of the people there, old neighbors and family friends, though several of them had that particular careful quality that told me they'd been getting their information from one source for the past decade. It was fine. I was proud of my son. That was the only thing that mattered. She found me near the edge of the yard, late in the party, after the food was mostly gone and people were standing around with their second and third drinks. She looked good. She'd always taken care of herself, and she smiled when she walked up, the real smile, not the performance one. We'd managed to get to cordial over the years. It wasn't warm, but it was civil. We talked about our son for a few minutes, his job prospects, a girl he'd been seeing. And then, I still don't know exactly what prompted it, she said, I've been thinking lately about when we were married." She paused. "I think you turned out better than I expected." It wasn't an apology. She wasn't built for those. But there was something almost approaching honest in it. I said, "I had to." She tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means I didn't have another option. You'd closed the other ones." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't," she started. "I know what you told Richard Fowler," I said. Richard Fowler was the banker. I'd found out about the conversation 5 years prior, from Richard Fowler himself, who had the decency to be embarrassed about it by then. "And I know what you told my partners in '09. And I know about the savings account." I said it calmly. I wasn't angry. I'd processed the anger a long time ago, and what was left was just information, just facts laid flat. She looked at me for a long moment. "You never said anything." "No," I said. "I didn't." "Why?" I nodded toward my son, who was standing across the yard laughing with his engineering school friends, looking like the kind of man you'd be glad to know. "Because he didn't need to see that." She followed my gaze. She looked at him for a while. "He's a good kid," she said finally. "He is," I said. "He had to figure some things out on his own, but he got there." She understood what I meant. I watched her understand it. Then she said, with genuine curiosity and maybe the first real question she'd asked me in years, "Are you happy?" I thought about the house, the company, the hospital project. My son asking me to have lunch twice a month now, regular as clockwork. The Saturday mornings I spent in the workshop I'd built in the garage, making furniture I didn't need just because I liked the work. "Yeah," I said. "I am." She nodded slowly. I couldn't read everything in her expression. There was something complicated there. Not quite regret, not quite envy, maybe just a reckoning. An acknowledgement that the story she'd told herself for 10 years had a second chapter she hadn't written. We stood there another minute, watching our son. Then I finished my drink, set the glass down on the table beside me, and went to say goodbye to my son before I drove home. He called me the next morning. "Did something happen last night?" he asked. "Between you and Mom?" "We talked," I said. "It was fine. She was quiet after you left. I imagine she had some things to think about." There was a pause. "Dad," he said, Did she do things to make things harder for you back then?" I didn't answer right away. He waited. He'd learned that from me, knowing when to wait. "She made some choices," I said finally. "So did I. I chose not to fight the way I probably should have. I chose to let it go and keep moving instead. Was that the right choice?" I thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. All the years of it, the rented house, the long drives home from job sites, The graduations and holidays where I felt like a footnote to a story someone else was writing. The slow, quiet accumulation of the life I'd built in spite of all of it. For me, yeah, I said. Fighting her would have cost me things I couldn't afford to spend. Like what? Time, I said. And you? Another pause. Longer this time. I should have asked sooner, he said, about how things were for you. You're asking now. That's not, it's enough, I said. Come for dinner Sunday. I'll make the brisket. He laughed, that real laugh, not the polite one. Yeah, okay. Sunday. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a while with my coffee, in the house that was mine, in the town I'd chosen, in the morning that was quiet and undemanding, and I thought about what she'd asked me at the party. Are you happy? The honest answer was yes. Not triumphant, not vindicated, not satisfied in the way that requires someone else's loss. Just settled. Solid. The way you feel when you've built something right and you know it's going to hold. She'd said I couldn't have done any of it without her. She was wrong about that. Not completely. She'd been part of my life for 22 years, and you don't come out of 22 years unchanged. She'd made me someone who knew what quiet felt like, who knew what it cost to hand someone the wheel, who understood, finally and permanently, what I was actually capable of when I stopped waiting for someone else's permission to find out. So yes, I suppose in that specific, narrow, unintended way, she was part of how I got here. But the here, this house, this morning, this coffee, this life, that was mine. I built it. Every wire, every joint, every year of it. And that's not something anyone can walk into and take credit for.